Welcome to the Hard Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Folmar, the founder of Hard Faith. I've been working in the film and television industry for over 16 years. On Hard Faith, we're about asking difficult questions about life and faith in an R-rated world. Today we have award-winning director, Brad Alexander, all the way from, is it Orange County?
I grew up in Orange County. I live in Carlsbad now, which is in North San Diego. It's close
lovely.
Though. It's like 45 minutes.
Totally. Southern California.
Yes.
Southern.
Yeah, born and raised.
Wonderful. Brad, you won top place and also audience award for your documentary feature film, The Threshing Floor. Can you tell us a little bit about your movie for our audience that may have not had a chance to see it yet?
Yeah, and I mean, that was unbelievable. So my deepest gratitude to you and the audience there. It was like fairly unexpected, but yeah, the Threshing Floor is, I guess the way I sum it up is it's an evangelism film that's disguised as an addiction film. And I don't mean that in like a weird manipulative way, more in the way of I wanted to make a film that I could potentially show my friends who didn't know the Lord about my other friend who got very wrapped up in a heroin addiction, and about the steps that he was able to take to get him back to not only being a productive member of society, but having like a really great life and walking out the calling God had put on him. And I wanted it to be kind of like a film that you could watch and you could understand like the humanity in it. Like the decisions we're faced with and the things we go through that could put someone in a place where they would go from one drug to a harder drug to a harder drug and then wake up on the streets 10 years later and be like, how did I get here? And that people maybe who are struggling would watch it and say like, okay, they get it. They get what it's really like, and that we would be able to show them this is how Tim was able to work his way out of it. So the initial concept for it was very simple. I was working on a documentary for like 4 or 5 years that was not my film. I was a hired hand, and it got caught up in kind of like a post-production limbo. And I really wanted to do something that I was really passionate about. The previous film was about a Holocaust survivor, and it was about him making art out of artifacts from Auschwitz and trying to raise awareness and battling Holocaust deniers, all this stuff. And it was compelling, but it wasn't my story. And I had always felt like God told me back in 2019 when I was still in the commercial world that I was going to make gritty films that glorified him. And I didn't even recognize that when I reconnected with Tim, but I had reconnected with an old friend. We hadn't seen each other in maybe 15 years, something like that. And we reconnected. We were both Christians for like a long time at that point. Not the case when we had seen each other before that. I was pretty heavy into pill addiction. He was in a heroin addiction. By the world's terms, I thought I was doing pretty well and that he was doing pretty bad. But now I can see we were both in our struggle looking for escape. And when we reconnected, I was like, man, can I just like do a mini documentary, like a 5-6 minute piece to share your testimony, to encourage people out there? During COVID, I had started like a little testimony series where I would do just little interviews with people and try and put it out. And I sat him down for an interview and he started telling me stories. And I was like, there's no way I can do this in 6 minutes, like not well, at least. So we started to kind of figure out like, okay, would your parents go on camera? He talked to him. Yes, they will. Can we get a couple friends to go on camera? Yes, we can. So it became a short film. And then all of a sudden it became a feature film. And it didn't happen immediately either. I think I always try and tell people that all of my plans for how it was going to get funded fell through. We tried to crowdfund. We raised, I think, a little less than $5,000, which we were grateful for, but you're not making a film for that. I had met with, I won't name anyone, but various nonprofits, and everyone was like, oh, you got to do this. I see the vision. And as soon as you start talking money, they're like, well, let us know how that goes. And you're like, okay. Like, all right, I'm no closer to making this. And it got funded in like an unbelievable way. And then we made the film for, God, it was kind of like a 2 year journey, but a lot of it was post production.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it was trying to narrow the story in and find the story. So that's how it came to be. And we're always grateful to screen it. And mainly for the conversations it opens up. It tends to allow people to be vulnerable, and it's not uncommon for people to talk to me about people they know who are struggling or even their own past. And that's my favorite part of it, is that it gives people permission to say, like, I've struggled with this too, or my brother, or my cousin, or my husband, or whoever, my son. And then we can have a real conversation about what that looks like.
I love that. Your documentary was so powerful. I watched it numerous times in the judging evaluation, before the
Oh,
actual
wow.
screening at the Hard Faith Fest. But even watching it in the theater at the Hard Faith Fest, even though I'd already seen the film multiple times, I was honestly moved to tears 3 or 4 times watching this
Wow.
documentary again. It's so powerful. And I also think it speaks well to the issue and the shame surrounding addiction and how the church can respond, but often doesn't. I made an addiction film in
Absolutely.
2020 on the opioid epidemic called Shooting Heroin. And the thing that struck me so much when I was doing research is that everyone I talked to in my small town in central Pennsylvania, every single person from, the store clerk to a lady at church to, a classmate, everyone had lost a loved one, either in their
Wow.
immediate family or a cousin. Everyone had been affected by one degree of separation by the opioid epidemic. But to get people to talk about it, because there was so much shame, to get anyone to talk about it publicly, it was like pulling teeth, and it's understandable. But tell me a little bit about how y'all tackle addiction uniquely. As you said, it's an evangelism film. But why do you think the church struggles so much to address this issue?
Ooh, that's a big one, right?
It is.
I love talking about this though. This is like
I
one
know you
of
do.
my favorite subjects because God doesn't, like, take someone like me. I was not looking for God.
Hmm.
I was loosely raised in a house that I knew who God was a little bit, but my parents were separated from the time I was a baby. So the only life I've ever known was being in between two houses. And then there were several more divorces. So people were in and out of my life. So it's like I had a stepmom who taught me about the Bible, but then she was like primarily gone. And then my dad became a Christian and he got remarried, and then we would go to church sometimes. Um, and this isn't to take shots at them. It's just like I had zero understanding of how God actually operated in someone's life, right?
Yeah.
So I go, and I in high school was really struggling. I was in the straight edge scene, so I wasn't doing drugs, but I was no better off than someone who was. I ended up at continuation school. I was in the punk rock scene. I was living on someone's couch senior year, and just like my life was collapsing. So
Hmm.
it's like when Jesus says, like, build on the rock, he talks about when the storms come, the house falls. A lot of times you think you've built on a solid foundation, and it's not till storms show up that you're like, I have no foundation. And for me, I had like a 4 or 5 year struggle where everything in my life was collapsing. My little chosen family in the punk scene, it's like there was backstabbing, there's times you get jumped, there's all sorts of craziness. And it made me who I am, but it all leads to, there's numerous events where I was drinking and taking pills and I almost died. And I have friends who have died that way that I still mourn 20 years later. And it's like the great mystery of life is like, why did God spare me and then show up in this room when I said like a very half-hearted prayer, and I felt his presence hit me, and it was undeniable. It was like, I've gone too far to say I don't believe in this anymore,
Yeah.
right? I felt what I absolutely knew to be the presence of God entered that room. He didn't say anything. It's like I felt it, and I knew in my heart of hearts, I'm like, whoa, this is real.
Mm.
The idea that God would save someone like me, actively come after, reveal himself to me, and then I'm meant to just go and work like a normal job and not ever talk about my faith. And, it's like, Why would that be the case? So my fundamental belief is that God rescues people to go help rescue people, that God wants to operate in trenches. But what happens is either we can't relate, or it seems so far off, or we don't understand. So a lot of times when someone is struggling with any sin, it's like, go repent and get right, and get on with it. Why are you still struggling? And I think a lot of us secretly would go, like in our walk of sanctification. And for me, I stopped doing drugs immediately. And no one had to tell me. That's not everyone's story, but that was mine. But the root causes that I used pills to sedate played out in other areas of my life, right? So the validation issue, the anger issues that would kind of surface, and something would happen and I'd lose my cool. And then it's like, why am I still struggling? Like, I gave my life to Jesus. Like, why do I still act like this or whatever? So anyway, this is a long-winded tangent to say, a lot of times the church's approach can be to throw a Bible verse or two and say, you know, get right with Jesus, and then all this will stop happening. And the people in the film and myself, our belief is that God is the great healer. But if you don't understand the battlefield that you're operating in, then you're going to get slaughtered.
Yeah.
So for me, to give you a practical example, I think I self-sedated. I didn't have a poison of choice, but I self-sedated because I felt like an orphan in the world. I felt like I was an accident. I felt like my life didn't have value. I felt like I was never meant to amount to anything. And I was kind of just like this loser punk kid who, you know, can't even live at home when he's 17, and, you know, this and that and the other thing. And then I give my life to Jesus. And then it's working on this film that I realized all of those same things are still operating in my life. I'm just not, the symptom at that time was addiction. The symptom now became, okay, if I make something of myself, if people tell me I'm enough, will I be enough? And then you start to chase after validation from bosses, from friends, from credentials. I'll show everyone, if I can make a film and get it into the right festival, then I'll be enough. And I think through working on this film, from identifying I'm not an orphan, I've been adopted into God's family, right? I'm not an accident. God says when I was in my mother's womb, he knew me. That's a bold statement. It means that he knew the plan he has for me. He knew exactly what family I would be in, the experiences that he could shape and use to mold me, that I would be a better director now, because making films was God's plan for me. It wasn't mine. And that's a whole other story, right? But now I'm at a point where it's like, okay, if this was God's plan, and the things I went through molded and shaped me, and the opportunities I've had in life that I never should have had, from working at the commercial agency to getting to take our red camera from the agency whenever I wanted to go shoot music videos or whatever I want to do, to becoming a storyteller, getting passionate about helping people with, addiction. If that's all God's plan, and how he funded all of my films has been outside of my plans, it's also been his plan, then the whole thing's really about him, and I don't have to seek anyone's validation in it. I just have to do what God is asking me to do.
Yeah.
So I feel like I might have gone a little off topic, but I think
our
primary focus is, if we can help people understand the not the symptom as much as the root cause, is what is driving you to addiction. If you're stuck in a heroin addiction, the first thing we need to do is detox you off the drug. You can't make rational decisions while you're strung out on dope or meth or pills or anything else. Alcohol is just as bad, right? Once we separate you from it, a lot of the guys in the film would say, okay, now we need to help you get your body back into homeostasis. So working out, eating right, getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, those things are going to help you start to stabilize, getting your blood work done. And then we need to figure out what is actually going on that you've run to addiction and substance and developed unhealthy relationships with substances to avoid or to escape or to sedate the feeling. And once you identify that, then it would be, you got to bring it to God, and you got to work through it with God. Allow God to heal those things. He wants to heal it. But if I was always just focused on, I just can't take pills anymore, I can't do drugs anymore, and that's all I'm focused on, then I'm not going to realize that it's playing out as a validation issue or as an anger issue, because I'm just focused on that one sin over there. Just don't do drugs anymore. By identifying what led me to the drug addiction, then I could see, oh, this is playing out in other ways. And I can work through that with God and ask him, can you help me forgive these things in my life? Can you help me accept them? Can you help me release them so that they're not telling me things about myself or my identity that aren't true? And then as I work through that, I can let things go. And then I become in a position where I can help someone else. So that's like kind of, I guess, our philosophy in making the film is, I think Joe says towards the end, bleeding wounds bleed on people.
Yeah.
So if you have open wounds in your life, then they're going to bleed all over everyone. And then how that plays out is you disrupt, you self-sabotage, you construct, and all of a sudden you have no good relationships in your life. Your relationship with your family is still bad. And it's like, but I gave my life to Jesus. What do I need to do? And it's like, be in the word, be in prayer, be in fellowship, but also be open that God may want to bring things to the surface so that he can heal them. And if every time something comes to the surface, you repress it and try and bury it down and pretend like, no, everything's good. I'm a new creation. You are a new creation. But God still will bring things to the surface so he can deal with them.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong process, sanctification.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not.
Yeah, and I only feel more broken now than I did 15 years ago, right?
Same. And that's sometimes a challenge, I think, especially for new converts or even like churches that have maybe a more simplified view of sanctification or conversion, is that, someone like you had a radical story where once you accepted Jesus, you got off the pills. But for some people, unfortunately, that can be a lifelong struggle to kick their addiction, or it can take multiple years or a lifetime, or sadly they succumb to their addiction. And it can be very messy, like people can have sobriety and then, relapse and relapse and relapse. And the same is true for so many of our ongoing residual sins. Obviously we continue to be sanctified by God's grace alone, and yet, just like you shared and I agreed with, sometimes I'm frustrated at how slow sanctification is, because I do want to be better. And yet for these people who are addicted to drugs like heroin, I mean, their sin is literally killing them on the outside and on the inside. Our sins are killing us on the inside, and we can keep them private. But for these addicts, I mean, it's life and death every day. Every time they try one of these drugs, even once, it can be the last time. And so it's such a vital topic that you've covered so well in your documentary. What has been the response? I know you had a premiere, I think the weekend before or a couple weeks before the Hard Faith Film Festival. What's been the response, and what is going to be the release of the Threshing Floor?
Yeah, so we'd initially premiered the film at Las Cruces International out in New Mexico, which is a film festival. We wanted to do something in California. And I didn't have the acceptance from Hard Faith, which actually came, like, I booked a theater, and like a week later I got the acceptance from Hard Faith. And I'm like, that's so funny, because I wouldn't have booked a theater if I had waited a week. So because God is a God of timing, I'm like, well, then God wants to do something at that screening, so we're just going to roll it.
Yeah.
And we sold out the theater at 320 tickets.
That's amazing.
And it was like, there was technical difficulties running up to that night, and I'm stressing out. And then our team kind of met, me, Tim, Joe, and we're like, we just got to let it go. Like, God has his hand on it, and we are only in charge of how much we're in charge of. So we went, and the speakers did have a little bit of issues, and I was a little stressed about it, but it's like half the room started cheering when Tim said he gave his life to Christ, and people laughed, people cried. There's a lot of people who don't know the Lord in that room too. There was 25 people that I know of from a rehab center that are currently in recovery, that some of them, I think they're like a week into their journey, so they're like at the start. And we had a room. We brought everyone on stage to honor them who's in the film or a part of it, which was really cool. And then we did a 5-person Q&A.
Wow.
And that was really impactful. We had someone who had served, I think, 27 years for murder 2, I want to say. Gang related. He was 16 and he had stabbed someone to death at a party because a fight broke out, and he went and he owned it and he pled guilty, and they threw the book at him.
Wow.
And he got out, he got saved in jail, and we had a therapist on the panel. We had Joe and Jeff Blaylock, who were both in the film. And it was just like, it was really moving. And one thing that Brian, who had done the prison time, he's working in recovery now. And he was saying, like, whatever we have to do, because it used to be that if someone relapsed, they could run it out for a year or two and then maybe come back. And he's like, now, if they leave that facility, a week later, we're finding out that they're dead because of fentanyl.
Yep.
He's like, the chance to like wrestle this out the margin has shrunk.
Oh yeah.
And so we were just trying to make it clear that night that it's like, we have to love people. We can't enable people. You have to have boundaries, but you have to remind people of who they are, how much God loves them, that their life has value, that there's people ready to walk alongside them when they're ready to turn it around. And we chopped up some issues close to addiction, and it was awesome. And then to go to Hard Faith a week later, it was like, that was Saturday, and then Friday I was with you guys. And it was like, what a cool, like, 7 days.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the reception is, you've seen the film, so the Flo and Kevin sequence about her losing her son always gets people. I hear about that a lot. Joe at the end talking about the loss of his son and his daughter in tragic ways, and how to carry the load that we have and deal with the cards we're dealt. I think that always hits people. And you know, there's always spiritual warfare, I feel like, when we show the film, but there's always someone, if not like a dozen people at Long Beach, it was a lot, that approach me and tell me about someone in their life. And I think that's the best part for me, is just the conversations. Because I mean, you're a filmmaker, you've made compelling films. I think all of us as filmmakers, you kind of watch what you did a year ago and you're like, all I can see is the things I would do different, or the flaws, or like, what if I had done it this way, or what if I had paced this different? And I think most other people aren't focused on that, but it's hard when it's your project to like not look at those things.
Totally.
And for me, I'm just always reminded that it's like, God uses this film despite whatever flaws Brad has, despite whatever could have been done differently in that film. The story speaks for itself, and the stories in it speak for themselves, and people are always moved by that. And I just think it's the Holy Spirit just grabbing a hold of whoever can receive it. And it has very little to do with me, and more the people that I've kind of dedicated my life to elevating other people's voices. So I know kind of in the filmmaking world, the documentary and the narrative filmmaking, I've realized a lot of people look at documentaries as like, I don't want to say a step down, but like you kind of get that vibe. And I get it, because making a narrative, you guys have to have so many elements come together right. The casting is going to have a huge impact on how that film comes together. The directing is going to have a huge impact. Who DPs it. So how it's shot, what focal length choices they made, how they lit things, that's going to affect the mood. That's going to affect how everything translates. And then how it's edited, what takes you use, how you pace it, the person who scores it, how does the score convey it? That's a lot of elements. And the budgets are generally higher. So it's like you have a bigger weight, you have more things that need to come together. And then in the documentary world, it's like I work on small crews, I edit my films. It's like, it's me and a C300 or the C70 over here. Like I'm just running around in the trenches, getting in cars with people, you know? and it does feel different, but I'm like a documentary filmmaker through and through. Like I love it, and for me the interview space is like this very sacred place where I give people the ability to share with me some of the worst moments of their life in a way that feels safe, and they can trust that I'm not going to put them on Front Street and make it reality TV or put them on blast or create drama. That I'm going to handle that story with care and finesse and try and put it in the film in a way that I can say, like, this is what matters about this, and this is what they're feeling, and this is why they're sharing this. And people are always receptive to that, and that's really cool. And I think it's just an example of God using all these stories, and I get to be the guy steering the ship to elevate those. As far as distribution and where it's going to come out, it's still a little bit of a journey right now.
Sure.
So there's conversations going on. I don't know exactly where those conversations are going to go, but we still have, I think, 10 applications out. So there may be some more festivals in our run. We're trying to navigate some free church screenings. The only stipulation is we want time for a Q&A.
Yep.
So we're trying to, it's not a theater experience. It's a smaller screen. The sound system's probably more scaled back. It's not surround sound, but it would be free, and then we can talk to the audience. So we're going to try and set some of those up. Sparrow, who you brought out to the festival, and I connected, and we've been in talks, and he told me that, you know, a couple of his friends are interested in the film. We got approached by a sales agent. I didn't necessarily, after reviewing the contract I was sent, I wasn't super thrilled on it. And my investor was like, oh, I don't think we're taking this, you know?
Yep.
But as I said at the festival, it's like the way that God has funded my films has let me know that the same God who funded the film can be trusted with how the film comes out. So I'm doing my diligence to have conversations, but wherever God wants to take it is like, you know, it's up to him. It's his film at the end of the day. I just got to play my role.
Absolutely. I love that. Tell me, I was so glad that you came out to the film festival, and your documentary is a perfect fit, obviously, for the hard faith genre. How did you find hard faith, and what was your experience like attending the film festival?
It was so cool. I mean, I had submitted to all secular festivals. And I was like, we're going to try, you know, we mentioned Jesus by name more than once. So yeah, I know how that can go, you know, we're going to try. And I was like, it feels wrong to just submit to secular. But every Christian festival I was coming across, for the most part, was family-friendly content. And it's like, okay, we're not that, but why does it have to be family friendly? Like, that's such a narrow, like, sure, we need those. I'm all for it. But like, it's a very narrow box.
It really is.
And I show a, you know, simulated drug use in my film. So that's not going to go over. Like, I would never want anyone like under at least high school level to see my film. I just don't want to plant the ideas, you know?
Yep.
But so I'm looking, and I must have opened like probably 30 or 40 different festivals on Film Freeway that came up when you select the Christian box or faith-based box. And then I got to Hard Faith, and I told Tim, I'm like, everything that I've been saying to you about like the like little in-between path we're trying to work in, I'm like, it's literally written in their bio. Like, I didn't know anyone else like saw that there's a void there. And as I read the description you had on the festival, I'm like, this is like our people. And I'm like, if we don't get into this festival, I'm going to be like super bummed, because it's like, it literally is written for people like us.
Oh, yeah.
So you're like one of, I think, 3 Christian festivals I submitted to. And you were like definitely the most in line with us. And coming, I just felt like it was a really refreshing time, because it was a bunch of filmmakers that are trying to express their faith and also make films that are making statements that may not be family friendly. And I just felt like I felt heard for the first time in a long time amongst filmmakers. And I had a lot of like great conversations. I would also say if anyone goes year 3 or 4 or beyond, you got to go to the after parties and like hang out with other filmmakers, because if you miss that part, you're missing like a huge piece of it. Watching other filmmakers' films and being encouraged is like super sick. Completely support each other. You know, the other cool thing is that no one was really coming and going that I could tell.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was sitting through everyone's films, and I think that's a complete show of respect and support, to be like, I'm not just going to come show up and watch my film and come talk about it and then bail and, you know, I'll show up later at the after party. Like, everyone was sitting through everyone's films, even the pitches, supporting each other. And I think that's huge. And then going to the dinners and hanging out. I mean, the second night, it was you, me, Sam, I think just like a few of us that all of a sudden it was midnight and we looked around and we're like, it's just us now. You know?
It was
and
like
it was
30
like,
people
awesome.
And then it's like just us. And we're like,
we were there for hours though, but that was the best part.
Yeah.
It's like everyone was vibing out and asking questions about each other's films and like why certain choices were made, or like what was going on with this. And I felt like, dude, this is like super cool, because for so long I've been making things that I'm showing to friends who don't know the craft to tell me how it's landing for them, and that's helpful. But they can't tell you, like, they don't have the terminology or the insight to be like, well, how this was paced didn't really land, or maybe you should have introduced this concept before that. Like, they just know, like, oh, this part felt slow, or I don't know if I understood this. And talking to other filmmakers that night and exchanging emails and everything, I was like, this is great, because now if I need someone to like show a rough cut of a film, here's other people that think about the craft in the same way I do, that I could potentially say like, hey, can you give me feedback on this?
Absolutely.
So I thought it was really cool. I would encourage anyone to go. It was a great time.
Thank you so much. And thank you for supporting it, like on your social media. Tell us about Wise Old Crow Media. I love the name. I never got to ask you. How did you come up with that name? And tell me about the production company. And what are you working on next?
Okay, so that's a story. Real quick on the other thing, when you said that, I just want to highlight you being a filmmaker clearly shows in like running the festival, because every other festival I've gotten in, and I'm not throwing dirt on anyone, but their social media and their website is very geared towards our festival, whatever famous person or producer is going to show up for like one night of the festival and their after party. And of the like 3 other festivals we got into before Hard Faith, none of them shared our teaser or a poster or did anything to promote our film. Right. So there's no action to help put people in that theater other than come check out our week-long party.
Yeah.
And you have been so supportive and using the teasers, using the posters, using the synopsis, like actually promoting the films. And I just wanted to like just highlight and encourage you that it's like, I noticed, I have to believe other people noticed too, that it's like, that is not the status quo. Status quo is to promote like the festival, right?
Yeah.
Or if someone's famous, but what about the filmmakers who are paying to get into the festival?
Yep.
And maybe didn't get in, but like, you know, to sweep through the gate to get into a festival and then not have the film promoted always feels a little like, shoot.
Yeah.
Like, how do people know to come see the film?
Right. Well,
but
I appreciate you saying that, you know, and I felt, I mean, whenever I saw your documentary and our official selection of 21 films, you know, as a filmmaker, I just feel, you know, honored that y'all would submit, you know, your work, because I know what it takes to make a movie, and it can be just war. You know, it can be so difficult. And the process, you know, it takes years, it takes money, it takes countless hours of editing. Like, the miracle of making a film is incredible. And then that we got connected, that you submitted, that we get to screen it. You know, I honestly think those official selections make the festival. Like, the festival showcases the films, but like the work and the artistry and the unique storytelling that we get to experience through the submission process, like, that is, in my mind, and has been like the festival, is just showcasing this amazing body of work, because it's so cool, because it's a curated selection of very high fine art that doesn't get the marketing dollars, so the whole world doesn't get to see it, but we get to see it. And I think it's a gift for the audiences that attend, and for me as the festival director and the judges. I mean, the submission process is kind of magical, because running this film festival, it's only the second year, but I don't know that many other like-minded filmmakers. I'm starting to learn more. We've been doing Hard Faith for 12 years, but I'm so encouraged meeting new filmmakers like yourself that are so skilled in their cinematic skills, but also in their storytelling.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also just combining the gospel with real hard life, gritty stories. It gives me so much encouragement every year doing this festival, by the submissions, by meeting the filmmakers, because I'm like, there's more of us out here than we realize. And this art needs to be showcased. Like, that's the ministry of Hard Faith, is showcasing films like The Threshing Floor. And so I find that to be a very important part of it. And I hope to just keep improving in that area, showcasing the filmmakers' work. Because that's what lives on. The festival is 2 days. People experiencing your films and following your journey and seeing your next documentary, that's a lifetime of enjoyment if they get to know you. And we want our audiences and our little, fans of Hard Faith to get to know the filmmakers that are making the same kind of work.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, you've been kind of paving the way, as you just said, for 12 years. It's like I've been on my journey in making gritty faith-based films the last 3.
Yeah.
So I'm sure for years you felt very alone, because I felt pretty alone, and it's only been a few years, right?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, when I started, I felt alone, but also kind of ostracized, because when I started 12, 13 years ago now, faith-based was only family friendly. 1 or 2 examples otherwise, but they were kind of doubling down on the family friendly, you can watch it with your whole family, blah, 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 blah. And as a single bachelor at the time, and a newly converted Christian who had lived very much and still was living in the real world, I didn't see my story reflected in any of these faith-based films. And I was so frustrated because I had suffered so much, so long, converting later in life. And I was so frustrated that filmmakers had an opportunity to share the real gospel and apply it to real life situations like my own. And none of them were doing it. And while they were wasting time on, trivial films that have very little to do with the gospel, all my friends are still unconverted, still dying, still addicted. The story of the gospel isn't getting out with the most powerful medium, which is film. And so it started off very slow and very small productions and micro budgets. But I think the festival is one of the best things that we've done, because we get to meet so many other filmmakers that are fighting the same battles and making great art that I don't think I could even create. And it's so encouraging, because now we have a loose-knit community of like-minded individuals making this kind of art.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really cool. As you're talking, it's just resonating. It's just like, I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it in that way, and it feels like a shame, because I don't want to tear down anyone who makes Christian films for a Christian audience first. If you feel like God has called you to encourage other Christians, do it. But I have to believe there should be more of us that are trying to make grittier films that aren't just, I'm not like trying to dirty up a film or throw things in there just for the sake of doing it. I'm trying to go after an audience that's where they're at, and find common ground. I feel like Paul, when he says like, I become all things to all men and hope that some would be saved, it's like, I feel like that's what he's talking about. Absolutely. And I felt the same way as you. I've told people, when Paul goes into a town, where does he go first? He goes to the Jewish temple, right? And then some Jews receive the message and some riot and try and have him stoned to death, arrest him. Then he goes to the Greeks. Some of them receive. Some of them are like, hey, you just exorcised a demon out of the girl that I've been using to fortune tell, and you just ruined my business, or you just ruined my statue business, so I'm going to try and have you killed or arrested now. and he's rejected by both sides and accepted by both sides simultaneously at the same time.
Yeah.
Tongue-tied there. So for me, I felt the same way as, in my analytics, because my festival link is its own link. It's not the one that I've allowed people to pre-screen the film off, et cetera, et cetera. When I see certain cities pop up that I know I submitted to a festival there, and they watch 80% of the film, which is seasoned with salt. We do drop a little, something about God or under the authority of God or things like that, but it's not until towards the end that we really ramp up the testimony.
Yep.
And that was intentional because we wanted you to understand that nothing he tried to do got him out of his addiction until he gave his life to God, and then it all clicked. But if I see that it stopped getting watched there, you watched, an hour and 20 minutes of a 94-minute film and you stop watching, and I go look and I'm like, oh, that's the testimony section, and then I get a rejection letter, I know what that means. It's like that was the trigger. That was the point that you weren't willing to go past, is when we said Jesus
Christian.
by name.
Yeah.
But then in the same, I sent it to a friend who works at a large distribution, to ask him for insight and different things. And he was kind of touring on Ordinary Angel, helping promote that. And he had helped with Jesus Revolution. He's been around for a long time. I've been friends with them for a long time. And I remember him telling me, we got on a phone call, and he was like, look, it's a compelling story and it's a good autobiography and I get it, but he's like, you went way too far. The drug sequences, it's too much. People don't want to see it. You should have just implied it,
I hate that.
Or if you showed a glimpse of it, then you should have stopped and not come back to it. Like, it was very much like you went too far for me. And it's like, but I didn't go too far for the person in active heroin addiction. That's like, oh, you get it.
Yep.
The things you're talking about are in my life right now. So I do feel like at times you're going to get opposition on both sides. But then also there are churches that have asked us to show it.
Yeah.
And there are secular festivals that let us in. So it's like, it's that push and pull and wrestling of like, God can open the door. So I think our job is to knock on some doors.
Yep.
But that rejection, if you let it get to you, will keep you up at night. And for me, there's times that, the enemy has attacked at me. I've had nights where I literally looked at these cinema cameras sitting on my desk, and I'm like, I just want to sell these and be done with it. I just want to go back and, be an account manager at an action sports brand or something and stop with all of this ups and downs and the attacks and the storms and the criticism and you should have done this and you should have done that. And you have those nights, and then I, call like one of the guys the next morning and they're like, no, get your head back in the game.
Yeah.
You're born for this.
Yeah.
Stay in the trenches. You're going to take some hits. If you're in a boxing match, you're going to get hit a few times, but like, you press on, you trust the calling God put on your life, and you walk forward. Don't rely on yourself. You are inadequate. God is adequate. Let him use you. Get out of the way. And then you remember like, okay, this is what I'm doing. And then when the festival rejection comes, you're like, all right, it wasn't meant to be. That's okay.
Right.
It'll go where it's going to go. And then you end up at Hard Faith. You have a blast. So it's, it's what it is. The Wise Old Crow question, to hit on that real quick. I was at a commercial production house during COVID. We kind of parted ways. At first, we're in California. We were non-essential. So we were sitting at home. I was doing passion projects, living on pandemic relief. And we decided to split. So I was starting to freelance a bit, and initially it was just like, I need an LLC for liability reasons. If my gaffer drops a light on someone, I can't have the client going after my savings account.
Right.
So I needed to start a brand, but ultimately it was meant to go faith-based at some point. I named it Wise Old Crow because there's this old saying, like, as wise as a crow, as wise as an old crow, and it's meant to be like that there's wisdom, because crows are these very communal birds. They have excellent memories. They're very crafty. They have like long memories too. They're very smart. So that's one way you can look at a crow. The other way is what? It's a trash bird, it's the Halloween bird, it's spooky, it's a murder of crows. And for me, it was like the lens you look through is everything. So is that bird a spooky trash bird that is hanging around the garbage can? Or is it a very smart, communal, intelligent bird that loves to be in flocks and remembers things, you know?
Yeah.
And then when I look at my friends, I'm like, okay, when you see this guy with neck and hand tattoos that maybe has this crazy past, what lens are you looking through on him? Because some of the people I know that maybe even in the church have been like maybe looked at weird are some of the most compassionate people that have helped more people than you can count. And it's like,
Agreed.
but that person's walking out God's calling more than your average Sunday goer.
Yep.
Not to like compare, but it's like, if you've devoted your life to trying to help people understand that God loves them and you're out there in the trenches and someone's looking at you and saying, oh, but they used to be a drug addict or they did 2 years in prison, so that's their identity. It's like you're looking through the wrong lens, you know?
Yep.
And that's what Wise Old Crow represents to me, is like, what lens are you looking through when I tell you these stories are about these people? And the Threshing Floor too. I think I said it at the festival, but a threshing floor is a place of separation, revelation, but in Old Testament times, it's where they'd separate the straw from the wheat, right? Get rid of the straw, purify the wheat.
Yeah.
I look at life as a threshing floor. Some of us got purified harder than others, but on the other side of it, we were prepared and we were sanctified and ready to walk out what God had for us. So if you look at that purification process and say that's your identity, it's like, that's not fair. That's what I went through so that I could be equipped, have the right compassion, the right empathy, but also have the right authority to do what God has asked me to do.
Yeah.
I can relate to those people because I went through that. I relate to people in the punk scene because I know what it's like to grow up in a dysfunctional environment. Most people in the punk scene, what attracts them there? We're all dysfunctional.
Yep.
Like maybe there's a couple kids that have like their parents are together and have a good marriage. Most of us are rowdy, we're rebellious, and we're looking for belonging because we're like, I just kind of want to tear things down and raise some hell.
Yep.
But when God grabs hold of those people, they're a lot of times the people that go all in on it. And they're like, what? I owe God everything I have. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go and just get a nice house and a nice car and take my vacation once a year. And that's going to be my life till I go to heaven one day.
Right.
It's like, no, I'm going to war for the kingdom. Yeah. I'm going to take territory back. And as you're taking territory back, Satan's going to war against you. He doesn't like that.
Yeah.
If you're trying to help free people from bondage, if you make a heroin film, you know, shooting heroin all those years ago, and you're trying to like bring humanity and make people look at this different, maybe set people free from bondage, things are not going to go all smooth. And that is the battlefield, right? But it's like, but we were made for this. It's like, yeah, let's war, man. So when Paul says, you can tell Paul's like one of my heroes. Some people side with Peter.
I love Paul. Yeah.
I'm a Paul guy.
Me too.
But when he says, I'm compelled to share the gospel, how bad it would be for me if I couldn't. He's saying, I can't take credit for any of this. Like, I'm compelled to do it. It's in me. It comes out of me. So that's why with the films, for me, it's like, I can't do anything else. Like, I love this. I feel like I was made for this. I feel like, you know, the story of how I got here is God's story in my life. I didn't go to film school. I wasn't interested in film at all. I was a skateboarder. Yeah. And right after I gave my life to God, he took my knee from me, or allowed it to happen. However, wherever your theology lands on that, my knee went bad. And through that, I shifted to filming skateboarding more than skateboarding. And then all of a sudden, 13, 14 years later, I'm making films. It's like the story of how that came to be, it's God's plan for my life. And it's like, well, I don't get to take credit for that. I'm compelled to do it. So it's really all about him. Yeah. But, and then what I'm doing now, I'm currently in post-production on a film that's called Tell Me About Tomorrow. It's about Cooper Noriega, who by the traditional sense would be considered a social media influencer. He had, I forget if it was 1 or 3 million followers, but either way, he had a following. He was living up in LA. He started to fall back. into a Xanax addiction, and he took half a Xanax and Burbank from someone he trusted. He died of fentanyl poisoning in the parking garage waiting for his Uber. He was 19 years old. And the film follows his family as they believe that Cooper left them work to do, and they believe that God is opening doors to prevent this from happening to other families. So it tells Cooper's story from growing up in Laguna Beach, which is like this picture-perfect town.
Yeah.
But to his struggles with mental health and substance, how that corrected him getting immersed with all of his friends and musicians up in LA, and you know, everything they were going through the rise of fentanyl and how he lost his life. And then it follows his family as they have his dealers are being federally charged right now. So it took a year and a half to build the case, but they're currently sitting in jail, waiting for their court date. It's likely they'll take a plea deal. Who knows though?
Yeah.
It might go to court, but that'll be the last shoot of the film is when sentencing happens, because I'm confident sentencing will happen. So we're working on that. It's called Tell Me About Tomorrow. His best friend, Jaden Hostler, a fairly famous musician, was touring with Machine Gun Kelly, writes music with Travis Barker. He wrote a song called Tell Me About Tomorrow when he was there with Cooper going through an overdose. And it's all about like, if you can make it till tomorrow, things will get better.
Yeah.
And I think Cooper's dad asked to name the film that, and I felt like it was a suiting title, because it's like, if not for fentanyl, I think Cooper would have stabilized. Yeah. And he would have been a me, or he would have been like any number of my friends still here, but that was taken from him by this very dangerous, very illicit street drug that is now pressed into almost everything you're buying off the streets.
Yeah.
So, and we're trying to bring humanity to it, because a lot of people treat it as almost like he had it coming. If you buy a Xanax off the street, it's like, well, he knew the dangers, and it's like, that's not fair.
That's not fair.
He thought he was buying a drug for anxiety. Right. He bought an opiate that can kill you.
Yeah.
Those are two different things, you know? And then we're working on the Joe Fury film at the same time, who is in the Threshing Floor. He's a pastor.
Yeah.
He's been in these trenches for 3 decades, but he lost his son to an overdose.
His testimony in the film, I mean, I just don't know how someone continues on, let alone be a pastor, with the loss he's experienced. I mean, it's incredible. What a living example.
And I mean, when you really unpack it, it's tragic.
It's tragic.
So we're doing his whole life story, because he was also molested by their family priest at the local Catholic church when he was a kid. His dad died when he was 17. So it's been, the enemy has thrown everything he can throw at the Fury family. And they've gotten through it with jokes, a lot of laughter, and a lot of somberness, and trying to help other people understand that. I'm going to quote Joe, because Joe's not here, but he would tell you, if we know that we win in the end, then what choice do I have to keep going? It's like he believes, you know, without a doubt, as I do too, that his kids are in heaven, and that we win in the end. So if we're going to get there, then let's keep going, and let's help other people not let their faith get shipwrecked when tragedy hits them, and bail. So he told me, you know, he's heard God talk to him a couple times. I'm envious of that. I haven't had that experience, but whenever someone sincerely has, I'm like, that's rad.
Yeah.
There was one time he heard a voice that wasn't God, though, and it was after his daughter was murdered. And he said he heard this voice, and it said to him, have you had enough yet? And he said he made a decision in that moment that he's like, I've never had enough, and I will fight this battle until the day I die.
Wow. And
he really has. And he's been a father figure to a bunch of us, even though he never really had his father. So
wow,
it'll be a cool story. So those are the 3 things I have going on, and I have no idea why God gave me the financing and the ability to work on 3 films before the first is officially like come out. I'm like, for some reason, he's allowed me to build a catalog. I don't know what that's about, but I'm sure he has a plan for it.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're funded by 2 different people, but my friend Reed has been a complete blessing in my life, and he's financially had my back, and he believes in the vision, and, you know, we just had a good time. So all these films have changed my life, not just from helping me process my past, but like the best part of filmmaking is making films with your friends. Like,
It's the
the
best.
stories we have, like the days on set, like don't let that pass you by, you know?
Yeah.
It's like that's the stuff you remember, and don't take advantage of people. I always tell people, like,
Hmm.
pay people an acceptable rate, because if you've been a Christian any number of time, you have been church hurt or burned by a ministry or a
Oh
Christian
yeah.
project that used and abused you.
The
And it's
Jesus
like it happens to
discount.
all of us, but yeah, it's like don't be that guy. People pay people a decent rate, treat
Yeah.
people well. It's not just an end goal.
Right.
It's like how you do it matters, and God says if you're faithful with the little things, you'll be entrusted with more. So
Hmm.
don't abuse the little things, but also cherish it, because making films is like screening films is awesome, but making the film is like the excitement and like what is it going to be and how's it going
Yeah.
to take shape and the stress and the sleepless nights. It's like I used to run marathons. You look back and you're like, what do you remember about the marathon? I remember mile 20 and 22 when I was like, I don't know if I can finish this marathon. And
Totally.
then you get through it and you're
Yep.
like, I don't remember the finish line aftermath. I remember the last 6 miles of like, can I actually do this? Yes, I can. Wait, really tired. Can I really make it? And I feel like a film's like that. You hit points where you're like, do I have the vision on this? What is going on? And then
Oh
you're like,
yeah.
no, I have the vision. Like, we're going for it. And that's the part I love.
It's like making a film is like, starting at the caboose on a train that's on fire and going off a cliff, and you got to figure it out before you get up to the engine.
Yeah.
It's a
What a
wild
cool thing to
ride.
be a part of, though,
It
right?
is. It's the best. And I have to like, I was on set earlier this year for a Christmas movie that we're finishing up. And, Murphy's Law is always present. There's a lot of stresses. You're burning finances every minute that you're on set, not filming. And it can be so stressful. Like making Shooting Heroin was the most difficult film I've ever made and I hope ever make in my life. And yeah, it is such a blessing to be on set, to be making art, to telling compelling stories. I mean, it's such a gift. And it's good to remember that because the journey is part of the process. It's a huge part of the process, and it's something that we can learn from if we're mindful and open while we're in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely. You learn more from a mistake than a victory. That's
Hmm.
unfortunate, but
It's the
and
way we
sometimes
learn.
people don't need to see the mistakes, you know?
Yeah, right.
Sometimes they're more obvious, but we learn a lot, so it's all a process, you know?
I
But
agree.
I used to make commercials and it was like here today, gone tomorrow, and I'd come in the morning and my boss is sleeping on his couch and he's married with 2 kids and I'm married with 2 kids, and it's like we'd be pulling all-nighters, stay up till 2 in the morning to hit a deadline, and then sometimes you would hit the deadline, the client doesn't even get back to you with revisions for 3 days, and then the
Oh
thing
man.
goes out, and then a week later it's like, and now it's gone,
Yeah,
and with films we're making things that could potentially outlive us, and I think it's really special to be a part of, so
I agree.
I take it serious. I know you do too. So, and Shooting Heroin's like really a cinematic masterpiece, so
Thank you.
it's crazy that that was the hard one for you, because it's like that one I feel like gets me fired up, and like some of the cinematography choices too, and some of the shots are like really stunning and cool,
Thank you.
because they're not picture perfect like beautiful. It
Yeah,
does feel gritty, but I powerful imagery and dramatic imagery always resonates with me more than like sunset, like beautiful stuff, you know?
right, right.
So it's like that one has all of that kind of going on, which is cool that it's like the one you had to work for, because it's like, but
So
now
much.
it's like, you had to work for it, but it's also like really a stunning film. So it's cool.
Thank you for watching it. Yeah, man, that set almost broke me as a filmmaker, but we got through it and it all came together, and I think it's still finding its audience. The film was released during the pandemic, right at the beginning of it, and so it kind of all of our theatrical release plans got scrapped.
Oh
But
man.
it's still finding its audience, and sadly, the opioid epidemic is more lethal and more relevant today than even when it was released 4 years ago. So
Yeah.
hopefully it'll continue to find audience and help people. Brad, amazing interview, amazing conversation, amazing film. I look forward to seeing your future submissions at the Hard Faith Film Festival. I hope you can attend future
Yeah.
festivals. And where can our audience learn more about Wise Old Crow Media and follow along with your journey, what links can you provide us?
Well, wiseoldcrowmedia.com
Okay.
has everything connected. So
Great.
there's a page for Threshing Floor. There's a page for Tell Me About Tomorrow. Joe's film hasn't officially been announced yet, so I haven't created that. There's an About Me if you want to learn more about me. The YouTube's attached. I think the Vimeo's attached. Instagram, Facebook. So like everything you would need if you wanted to follow the journey is attached on there. So I would just say wiseoldcrowmedia.com. All other social links will be attached to that.
Great.
And then the film pages have like some behind the scenes frames and teasers and trailers and all that fun stuff.
Wonderful. And then Wise Old Crow Media, I know I've seen you on Instagram, so our audience, please look out for them on Instagram and Facebook and wiseoldcrowmedia.com. Brad, thank you so much for your submission, for your work, for the conversation, and for being a supporter of Hard Faith. You're doing the Lord's work, and the Threshing Floor, I can't wait until it's public so we can share it with our audiences. Please let us know whenever it is available, and we'll share it on all of our channels. And it's a film everyone needs to see, I feel.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for your work. So I think you should be as encouraged as anyone here. It's like you're providing the platform that really wasn't there. So I think that's cool. So I plan to, even if I can't submit next year, if the film isn't ready, it's like I'm sure I'll be there hanging out. So
I hope so.
Yeah.
Wonderful. More late night conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your time,
just for
Brad.
that. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this edition of the Hard Faith Podcast. Please subscribe and share this podcast.